Ethan Drake stood in the vast, marble-floored foyer of his Los Angeles mansion, swirling a glass of single malt whiskey while the late afternoon sun splintered across the polished surfaces. Every reflection reminded him of a life that had once promised stardom, charm, and applause. Now it offered quiet echoes of something heavier, an unease he couldn't name. The mansion, with its towering ceilings and modern art installations, looked like a cathedral of perfection. Yet its shadows held secrets. The walls were adorned with photographs of Ethan and Vanessa at red carpet premieres, smiling as though their happiness had been captured permanently in each frame. The golden glimmer of Vanessa's hair, her laughter frozen in high definition, seemed almost mocking in the emptiness of the house. Ethan moved toward the living room, past the grand piano where dust had begun to settle, a reminder that their home was more a display than a sanctuary. He checked his phone. No new messages. A small pang of worry, unexplainable, ran through him. Vanessa was supposed to call this morning, as she always did, to discuss lunch plans. He scrolled through recent receipts on his tablet. A dinner charged to their account, at a restaurant he didn't recognize, an expensive gift card purchased online. The numbers didn't scream alarm, but they whispered. A tiny note of discord, unnoticed by anyone else, yet impossible for Ethan to ignore. His mind wandered to last week's party at the Sunset Boulevard estate. Vanessa had laughed, effortless and radiant, but her gaze had drifted, once, twice, lingering just a beat too long on another man across the room. Ethan remembered the tightening in his chest, the way his hands had clenched almost involuntarily around his champagne flute. He had said nothing, he never did, but the image haunted him now, slicing through the glamour like a shard of glass. Vanessa entered the room then, descending the staircase with the grace of someone born into cameras and spotlights. She wore a silk blouse in emerald green, her hair loose and shining, her expression calm, almost too calm. She noticed Ethan watching her. "You've been quiet all day," she said lightly, almost teasing. Yet there was tension under her tone, a subtle distance that made Ethan's gut tighten. "I've just been thinking," he replied, swirling his whiskey again. His voice carried more weight than intended, a subtle warning, an unspoken question. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, smiling politely, but it didn't reach her eyes. She placed a hand on the marble railing, leaning slightly, and Ethan saw the faint tremor of her fingers. A nervous tick, or was it fear? He didn't know. The house itself seemed to respond to the tension. The wind rattled against the tall windows, and the distant hum of traffic from the city below created a low, insistent vibration. Every luxury, from the imported rugs to the vintage wine cellar, felt suddenly hollow. Ethan's mind flicked to the thought that perhaps appearances were all they had, that the life they presented to the world was a mask stretched thin over deeper truths. He moved closer to Vanessa. "Everything okay?" His voice, carefully measured, carried both concern and subtle command. She smiled again, a practiced mask. "Of course, just tired," but Ethan's eyes caught the small crease in her brow, the way her gaze darted briefly toward her phone left unattended on the console table. Something was amiss. Always something was amiss. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the mansion's vast halls, Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. The house was beautiful. The life was enviable. Yet beneath the glittering facade, a quiet storm stirred. And though he could not name it yet, Ethan sensed that this storm would soon demand to be faced. In the adjoining study, a locked drawer waited, containing evidence of what would come. The letters, the missed calls, the whispers Vanessa had left in the margins of her life. Ethan did not know its contents yet, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, and as the evening deepened, those seeds would begin to grow, twisting into shadows that neither of them could ignore. Vanessa Drake sat cross-legged on the edge of her velvet chaise lounge, a pen poised above the crisp pages of her leather-bound, Diary. The room was dimly lit, the golden glow from a vintage lamp softening the sharp edges of the mansion's modern decor. Outside, the Los Angeles skyline glittered like a field of fractured stars, indifferent to the storm quietly gathering. Within her, her fingers hovered for a moment, trembling slightly, as though even the act of writing carried weight beyond words. She began with the usual facade, the rehearsals, the auditions, the smiles she wore for cameras and crowds alike. But her handwriting grew tense, jagged. Each sentence betrayed a quiet desperation she could never voice aloud. He doesn't see me anymore. He sees only what he wants. I am trapped in his vision of perfection. Vanessa paused, staring at the page. She could feel Ethan's presence lingering in the house, even though he had retreated to his study hours ago. The thought tightened her chest. Rehearsing lines earlier that day had felt mechanical, empty. She had delivered every line flawlessly, smiled when she was supposed to, laughed when the cameras caught her mid-gesture. But inside, her mind had wandered. She thought of freedom, of a life beyond the polished halls and the constant scrutiny. And then she thought of the divorce she had been planning in secrecy, the one she hadn't dared whisper even to herself in the presence of Ethan. Her mind flickered to him, Ethan, whose shadow seemed to stretch over every corner of her life. Memories of their earlier years together were bittersweet. Passionate nights, whispered promises, the thrill of shared secrets. But over time, the thrill had decayed into tension and unspoken resentments. His controlling habits, subtle manipulations, and quiet obsessions had left invisible marks, shaping her into someone she barely recognized. Vanessa wrote feverishly now, cataloguing the moments she had endured. The dinners where Ethan's gaze lingered too long on a minor mistake. The cold comments disguised as jokes. The nights spent in silence while he scrolled through his phone, monitoring her every movement. Each entry brought her closer to the decision she knew she had to make. Her diary was not just a journal. It was a witness to her life under scrutiny, a testament to a love that had slowly curdled into surveillance and fear. The mansion around her felt different in these quiet hours. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the polished floors, the ornate sculptures now imposing figures silently observing her. Vanessa closed her eyes and imagined a life without Ethan's constant presence, a life where she could breathe without calculating every word, every gesture. The thought was intoxicating, terrifying, and finally liberating. Her pen hovered once more as she outlined her plan, the lawyer she trusted, the documents she needed to file, the precise steps to take without alerting Ethan. She imagined herself stepping into a sunlit apartment, leaving the mansion and its gilded cage behind. Every sentence on the page solidified her resolve. Vanessa's eyes lingered on the diary, reflecting both hope and fear, a duality that would define the days ahead. Yet beneath this newfound determination, a shadow of guilt gnawed at her. Ethan had loved her once, in ways that had felt real, even if flawed. She had shared dreams, laughter, and nights where the world outside ceased to exist. The diary captured not just dissatisfaction, but the painful acknowledgement of loss, the mourning of what their marriage had once promised. A soft chime from her phone broke the silence, a missed call from Ethan. Her heart skipped a beat, a mixture of fear and the remnants of attachment. She set the diary aside, inhaling deeply, and allowed herself one more fleeting glance at the mansion's grand windows. Outside, the city lights twinkled, but inside, the quiet hum of tension lingered like a living thing. Vanessa closed the diary, pressing the leather cover to her chest, as if sealing away both secrets and courage. She knew the path ahead was treacherous, fraught with the potential for discovery, confrontation, and consequences she could not yet predict. But she had made a choice, a quiet, deliberate rebellion against the gilded cage Ethan had built around them. And with that, the chapter of secrecy began, setting in motion the chain of events that would soon shatter the illusion of their perfect life. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Drake mansion, slicing across the polished floors in sharp, angular lines. Ethan paced the living room, his shoes clicking against the marble as he reviewed the schedule for the day. Every appointment, every detail, had to be perfect. And yet, something gnawed at him, a persistent unease he couldn't shake. The house, which once felt like a fortress of stability, now seemed alien, its grandeur highlighting the distance that had grown between him and Vanessa. Vanessa entered quietly, carrying a script from her latest audition. Her expression was neutral, but Ethan saw the flicker of avoidance in her eyes. She placed the script on the coffee table without a word, as if testing whether he would notice her deliberate silence. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered the note he had found last week, an innocuous-looking card tucked under the magazine rack, bearing words that seemed harmless, but hinted at secrets. "Morning," Ethan said, his tone clipped but controlled. "Did you sleep well?" Vanessa's lips curved into a small, polite smile. "Yes. And you?" Her gaze shifted briefly to the window, lingering too long on the skyline, a subtle deflection he recognized instinctively. Ethan followed her eyes, studying her carefully. "I've noticed you've been distracted lately," he said, choosing his words with precision. There was no accusation, only a probing curiosity. Like a scalpel cutting through the polite veneer of their interaction, Vanessa's hand trembled slightly as she flipped the pages of her script. "I've just been busy," she murmured, almost automatically. Her voice carried a subtle defensiveness, and Ethan's instincts flared. He had learned over time to read the small tells, the slight tightening of a jaw, the way her fingers brushed a page twice, the careful avoidance of his gaze. Every movement spoke volumes. Ethan moved closer, his shadow falling over her script. Busy, or hiding something? His words were soft, almost intimate, but they carried an unmistakable edge. Vanessa's eyes widened, the practiced calm faltering for a split second. I'm not hiding anything," she said quickly. Too quickly. Her voice shook despite her attempt at composure. Ethan noted the subtle crack in her facade, the imperfection that hinted at unspoken truths. The argument escalated, not with shouting, but with the precision of two minds circling each other, each testing boundaries, each probing vulnerabilities. Ethan's dialogue was sharp, almost surgical. "I see the messages, Vanessa. I see the nights you spend locked in your room, the phone calls you don't tell me about." Vanessa's response was measured but strained. "Those are my calls, my work. You don't need to control every part of my life, Ethan." Her words hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment, silence fell over the room. The mansion itself seemed to respond to the tension. The chandelier above flickered as the morning light shifted, shadows stretching across walls adorned with portraits of happier times. The echo of their voices bounced off the marble floors, amplifying the sense of distance and isolation. Ethan's mind flashed to past betrayals, not hers but his own, memories of friends who had deceived him, partners who had left, and the faintest, betrayals of his own youthful ambitions. The combination of memory and suspicion twisted inside him, feeding a growing paranoia. Every word Vanessa spoke, every hesitation, became proof of her hidden intentions. Vanessa, sensing the escalating tension, closed her script and folded her arms. "Ethan, this isn't you. You're making shadows out of nothing." Her voice, though firm, carried a note of fear, of desperation, of love strained to its limits. Ethan stared at her, torn between longing and suspicion, between memory and mistrust. The cracks in the mirror of their marriage were widening, reflecting not the glamorous life they showed the world, but the fractures hidden beneath. A soft chime echoed from the study. Her phone, left unattended, vibrated against the polished oak desk. Both their eyes flicked to it, a silent acknowledgement that the next layer of truth was waiting, hidden, ready to fracture the delicate balance further. And in that shared, tense glance, neither could ignore it. The facade was breaking, and the shadows of secrets would soon demand recognition. Ethan sat alone in his private study, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting elongated shadows across the room. The walls, lined with awards and framed photographs, seemed almost oppressive tonight, bearing silent witness to a life of calculated perfection and private paranoia. His eyes lingered on the latest receipt he had found, a high-end boutique charge that Vanessa had never mentioned. Small, insignificant on paper, yet it fueled the spiral of suspicion, twisting tighter around his mind. He had begun noticing patterns. Late night, phone calls, hushed conversations that ended when he entered the room, and Vanessa's tendency to retreat into her private spaces. Tonight, he resolved, he would uncover the truth. Carefully, he retrieved a small package from the drawer beneath. His desk, cameras, micro-trackers, and a device to monitor call logs. Each item represented a step deeper into the hidden corners of his wife's life. A private investigation he justified as necessary, as protective. The first face to enter this clandestine world was Maya, Vanessa's longtime friend and confidant. Ethan had observed her at countless parties, always radiant, always seemingly harmless. But through the lens of suspicion, every gesture became significant, every smile potentially a mask hiding secrets. He remembered a brief encounter in the kitchen, a subtle glance exchanged between Maya and Vanessa that had lingered just a beat too long. That single memory had lodged itself in his mind, unrelenting. Across town, Detective Harper was quietly taking notes on an unrelated case, but the threads of intuition nudged him toward the Drake mansion. A routine check, a casual observation, yet there was a sense that something darker lingered beneath the surface of the luxurious estate. Harper had no inkling of the tension suffocating the couple inside, but his meticulous attention to detail would soon intersect with Ethan's obsessive scrutiny. Ethan set up the cameras strategically, placing them in corners where shadows pooled and light barely touched. He ran the wires carefully along the walls, his movements methodical, almost ceremonial. Each camera, each tracker, became a lens not only into Vanessa's world, but into the deeper recesses of his own mind, where fear and suspicion coiled tightly. Like serpents, he tapped into the call monitoring device, watching the screen flicker as past logs appeared. Some calls were work-related, some from friends he recognized, but a few remained anonymous. Each beep, each number, seemed to confirm his growing anxiety. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, feeling the weight of control settle on his shoulders. Yet, with control came isolation. Every act of observation pulled him further from the person Vanessa truly was, and from the man he once thought he was. Meanwhile, Vanessa laughed lightly on the phone with Maya, unaware of the silent cameras recording the curvature of her smile, the ease of her gestures. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Every word she spoke, every nuance of her tone, became a puzzle to decode, a hidden message he was determined to decipher. Yet as he watched, a small pang of guilt pierced him. A recognition that his obsession was reshaping reality, bending perception until love and fear were indistinguishable. The mansion itself seemed to respond to this new surveillance. Shadows lengthened along the marble floors, draping the chandeliers and the grand piano in a tense stillness. Even the portraits on the walls appeared accusatory in the flickering lamplight, capturing the brilliance and joy of past years while silently condemning the intrusion of suspicion. Ethan paused, resting his hands on the desk, and glanced at a photo of himself and Vanessa on their wedding day. Her smile was radiant, unguarded. The memory pressed against him, bittersweet and haunting. He wondered when the warmth had slipped away, replaced by suspicion and hidden agendas. And yet, he could not stop. The cameras, the trackers, the private investigations. They were now extensions of his mind, a means to control the uncontrollable, to force clarity from ambiguity. As the night deepened, Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the blinking red light of a camera. Somewhere in the house, Vanessa moved silently, unaware that every action, every breath was being observed. Across town, Detective Harper's intuition nudged him closer, threading the invisible web that would soon entangle them all. The pieces were in place, hidden faces now watching hidden faces. Shadows were growing thicker, secrets multiplying, and Ethan felt both the thrill of control and the chill of inevitable discovery. Somewhere, beneath the gleaming floors and polished walls, the first cracks of collision were forming, and in the stillness, the mansion waited, patient and silent, for the storm that would inevitably break. Vanessa walked briskly through the quiet streets of Beverly Hills, the evening air carrying the faint scent of jasmine and car exhaust. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk as she made her way to a discreet law office tucked between a cafe and a boutique. The city lights shimmered like distant stars, oblivious to the turmoil building within her chest. Tonight was decisive. Tonight she would take steps that could not be undone, even if Ethan never discovered them. Inside the office, she met with her lawyer, a calm, pragmatic woman named Clara, who had guided Vanessa through careful legal maneuvers in the past. Documents were laid across the polished mahogany table, each page heavy with consequences. Vanessa's hands shook slightly as she signed, her signature flowing across the lines with a mix of resolve and trepidation. "This is irreversible," Clara said softly, her voice almost a whisper, aware of the magnitude of the moment. "You understand that once these are filed, he will know. There's no turning back." Vanessa nodded, her throat tight. "I know. I've thought about it for months. It's the only way. I can't keep living in his shadow." The words, though quiet, carried a heavy weight, an acknowledgement of betrayal, yet also of survival. Back at the mansion, Ethan's evening had begun innocuously. He was reviewing security footage, scanning for anomalies, when a small slip of paper fell from a book on the shelf. At first, he thought it was a stray receipt or note from months ago, but as he unfolded it, his heart thudded violently. The bar's handwriting was unmistakable, Vanessa's. The note contained fragments of her plans, meetings, calls, and veiled mentions of legal steps he had never been informed of. The words were calm, almost clinical, but to Ethan, they screamed of deception. He reread the note, his mind twisting the mundane into evidence of betrayal. Flashbacks surged unbidden. Memories of minor betrayals in his past life. Colleagues who had misled him. Friends who had abandoned him. All coalesced into a storm of suspicion. Each recollection amplified the sting of Vanessa's secrecy. Every moment of trust they had shared seemed now like a lie. Ethan's breathing quickened. He moved through the mansion like a man possessed, retracing Vanessa's steps, examining the rooms she had occupied earlier in the day. Each untouched glass, each chair slightly out of place, became proof of a hidden agenda. Shadows in the corners deepened, the flickering lights of the chandelier casting long, accusing shapes across the walls. In his study, Ethan muttered to himself, voice low but sharp. Why wouldn't she tell me? After everything. Why? The question hung in the air, unanswered, yet resonant with every inch of his being. He ran his hands over his face, feeling the heat of panic and betrayal coiling inside him. Meanwhile, Vanessa returned home, her face composed, her steps deliberate. She had no idea that Ethan had discovered the note, that the seeds of paranoia had been watered and were beginning to sprout. She moved through the halls with quiet precision, unaware of the cameras that recorded her every motion, every gesture. As their paths converged, tension crackled invisibly between them. Ethan, fueled by fear and betrayal, waited for a moment of confrontation, his mind oscillating between rationality and obsession. Vanessa, with her own secret carefully guarded, sensed only the faint tremor in the atmosphere. The way the house seemed heavier, colder, as though anticipating an inevitable storm. Ethan approached her in the living room, the note clenched in his fist. "Vanessa!" His voice was calm, deceptively so, yet every syllable carried the weight of accusation. "I found this." He held it out, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. Vanessa's eyes flickered with recognition, and for a brief moment, fear passed across her face. The confrontation, though still restrained, was electric, charged with emotion. Words would come, explanations and denials, but the fracture had already deepened. Trust was eroded. The undercurrents of their relationship surged into visible, dangerous territory. The mansion, silent yet sentinel-like, seemed to pulse with their tension. Shadows stretched along walls and floors, mirroring the widening gap between them. Unspoken truths, hidden plans, and the whisper of betrayal filled the space. And in that charged, fragile moment, both of them sensed that nothing would ever be the same again. The mansion lay cloaked in darkness, the only light spilling from the faint glow of the chandelier in the grand foyer. Shadows stretched across the marble floors, elongating and twisting in ways that seemed almost alive. Ethan moved silently through the halls, the note still clenched in his hand, his mind a tempest of suspicion and fear. The discovery of the hidden file on Vanessa's laptop earlier that evening had shattered the fragile equilibrium of their lives. He found her in the study, seated at the desk with her laptop closed. The glow of the city reflected in her wide, tense eyes. The air between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words, unacknowledged resentment, and the looming threat of confrontation. Ethan's movements were deliberate, each step echoing in the cavernous room. He stopped just behind her, chair, the paper trembling in his grasp. "Vanessa," he said, voice low but charged, carrying the weight of accusation. "We need to talk." She turned slowly, masking the tremor in her hands, her expression a careful blend of calm and apprehension. "Ethan, Her voice faltered as she saw the note in his hand, the evidence of betrayal laid bare. "I found it," he said, cutting her off. "The file, the calls, everything." His chest heaved with suppressed emotion. Rage, fear, and heartbreak warred within him, each emotion amplifying the other. He could feel the mansion itself responding, the walls seeming to close in, the shadows thickening as though anticipating the storm that was about to break. Vanessa rose, placing a hand lightly on the desk as though to steady herself. "It's not what you think," she said, her tone firm yet vulnerable. "I'm not betraying you. I can't live like this anymore." Ethan's eyes narrowed, searching hers for sincerity, for weakness, for proof of deceit. "Not live like this." His voice shook slightly, though he tried to keep it controlled. "You're planning to leave me. You've been planning it all along, behind my back." I had to," Vanessa whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I couldn't tell you. You wouldn't understand. You don't trust me." "You never have." The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the city beyond the tall windows. The mansion seemed to breathe with them, the flicker of the chandelier casting ghostly shadows across the walls. Every object, the polished oak desk, the scattered papers, the expensive rug beneath their feet, became a participant in the unfolding tension. Ethan's hand tightened around the note, the paper crumpling slightly. His mind raced, memories of past betrayals, both real and imagined, colliding with the present. Every lie he suspected, every omission he feared, crystallized into a single, overwhelming truth. Vanessa was leaving, and he was powerless to stop it. "You can't just decide this," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Not after everything we've built. Not after us." Vanessa stepped back, her own emotions brimming beneath the carefully maintained composure. "I didn't want it to end like this. I loved you once, Ethan. I do, in some way. But love isn't enough if it's poisoned by fear and control." Their words hung in the room, fragile yet volatile, each sentence a spark threatening to ignite a fire long smouldering beneath the surface. Ethan moved closer, the mansion's shadows lengthening as though leaning in to witness the confrontation. "Fear and control?" he repeated, his tone sharp, his breathing heavier. "Is that what you call it? After everything I've done to protect you, to keep us safe?" "I don't need protection," Vanessa replied, her voice trembling but resolute. I need to live. The moment stretched taut, electric with unspoken emotions. Love, resentment, fear, and desperation, entwined in a dance that neither could escape. The mansion, silent and patient, seemed to hold its breath, aware that the boundaries of trust, loyalty, and sanity were being tested to their breaking point. And then, in the thickening shadows of the room, the first cracks began to show, the tension palpable, the fragile balance shattered. What had begun as suspicion and secrecy was now a confrontation teetering on the edge of catastrophe. Every glance, every word, every breath carried the weight of consequences neither of them could yet fully comprehend. The mansion was silent, cloaked in the black velvet of night, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of the city spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows. Shadows twisted across the marble floors and ornate walls, painting the grand interiors in stark contrasts of light and dark. Ethan's chest heaved as he stepped closer to Vanessa, the note and the file still clutched tightly in his hands. Rage, fear, and an almost unbearable longing collided within him, each emotion feeding the other like dry tinder to a growing flame. Vanessa stood near the doorway to the library, her body tense but upright. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice soft yet trembling. She had backed away from the confrontation, hoping reason could still reach him, but the intensity in his eyes told her that words alone would no longer suffice. "I trusted you," he said, voice low, shaking with emotion. "I built everything for us, for you, and you. You planned this behind my back." His hands tightened, trembling with the effort of restraint he could no longer maintain. Vanessa's lips parted as if to speak, but Ethan moved faster than thought. His hands gripped her shoulders, firm yet trembling, a physical manifestation of the emotional storm consuming him. "Ethan, what are you?" she began, but the words were cut off by the suffocating weight of his presence. Panic and love entwined in his mind, each battling for dominance. He saw flashes of their early years, the nights filled with laughter, their whispered promises, the warmth of her smile, and yet those memories only deepened the sting of betrayal. He could not allow the world, or even himself, to witness this fracture, this final rejection. His hands moved instinctively, driven by emotion rather than reason. Fingers pressed into her neck, pressing, constricting, the heat of anger and desperation surging through him. Vanessa gasped, reaching up to try to push him away, her hands weak against the overwhelming force of his grip. "Ethan, stop, please," she cried, her voice breaking, mingling fear with pleading. But the words, instead of grounding him, seemed to accelerate his descent. The mansion itself seemed to respond, shadows stretching, the chandelier above flickering with the instability of his emotions, every object in the room magnifying the intensity of the moment. His mind raced, each second stretched into eternity. Love, betrayal, regret, and rage fused into one paralyzing cocktail, clouding judgment, twisting reality. He remembered the note, the secret file, the months of deception, real or imagined, and felt the crushing weight of abandonment. He could not breathe. The room tilted. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. And then, in a moment, suspended between thought and instinct, the act was complete. Vanessa went still, her eyes wide, reflecting a mixture of shock, fear, and a lingering warmth that haunted him. The mansion seemed to exhale, the shadows settling around them, the world outside oblivious to the darkness that had unfolded within. Ethan's hands trembled as he released her, stepping back. The enormity of what had happened surged over him in waves. Panic, disbelief, sorrow. His breath came in ragged bursts, and his gaze locked on her motionless form. Memories of tender moments, her laughter, the softness of her hands, the fleeting warmth of her love, assailed him, mingling with the horror of his actions. The mansion, once a sanctuary of opulence and beauty, now felt alien, oppressive, its walls echoing with silent judgment. He sank to his knees, pressing a hand to his face, willing the nightmare to dissipate. Yet there was no escape from reality. The act was irreversible. Love and rage, desire and destruction had collided, leaving nothing but the chilling aftermath. Ethan's mind raced, replaying every argument, every perceived betrayal. Could it have been avoided? Was there another path? Each question, each fragment of thought, only intensified the moral and emotional devastation consuming him. The grandeur of their life, the awards, the luxury, the cameras and mirrors reflecting perfection, now seemed meaningless, hollow, taunting him with the beauty that had masked the darkness within. And in the quiet, broken mansion, Ethan sat, amidst shadows and echoes, fully aware of the irreversible chasm between who he had been and what he had become. The fatal grip had ended one life and reshaped another, binding him in guilt, grief, and a horror that no mirror, no reflection, could ever erase. The mansion was eerily silent, the usual hum of life replaced by a suffocating stillness that seemed to press down from the ceilings and walls. Ethan moved through the rooms with mechanical precision, each step echoing against the marble floors, each breath heavy with the weight of what he had done. The grandeur of the Drake estate, the chandeliers, the polished wood, the expensive furnishings, now felt cold, oppressive, accusatory. Every surface reflected not wealth, but guilt. He knelt beside Vanessa, staring at her still form, trying to reconcile the warmth of her presence from memory with the horrifying reality before him. Her hands, once soft and expressive, now lay limp. Her eyes, which had once sparkled with mischief and love, were empty. Panic surged through Ethan, mixing with a sorrow so deep it threatened to suffocate him. He wanted to scream, to run, to rewind time, yet he remained frozen, paralyzed by both fear and disbelief. The first instinct was survival, control. Ethan rose, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. He wiped the blood from his trembling hands, using towels hastily pulled from the linen closet. He adjusted furniture, moved objects, and placed items in positions that would later appear innocuous, as though arranging a scene in a theatre. The mansion's sprawling rooms became a stage, each corner a participant in the grim choreography of concealment. Memories invaded him, unwanted and relentless. He saw Vanessa laughing in the sun-drenched garden months ago, her head thrown back, eyes closed, utterly free. He remembered nights by the fireplace, the gentle brushing of her hair against his chest, whispered promises and dreams shared in the quiet darkness. Each memory cut deeper than any blade, mingling love and regret, warmth and unbearable sorrow. Ethan moved to the study, scanning the room with obsessive attention. Papers were scattered, receipts stacked neatly, a half-finished coffee cooling. On the desk, every detail, every object became a potential threat. He gathered them, rearranging meticulously, attempting to impose order on a chaos that had already consumed him. Yet no matter how perfectly he staged the rooms, the mansion itself seemed to resist, amplifying the emptiness, reflecting the moral collapse in every shadow and polished surface. He paused before a portrait of the two of them at a gala, their smiles wide, eyes bright. A sharp pang of guilt struck him, almost physical in its intensity. This was the life they had portrayed to the world, a glittering facade of perfection and glamour. But it had all been fragile, brittle, hiding cracks that neither could have ignored forever. Now, those cracks had become a chasm, and he stood on its edge, teetering between horror and despair. Ethan's breathing was uneven as he moved through the rooms again, confirming that no trace of struggle remained visible. The mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Its silence was oppressive, the polished floors reflecting his own twisted reflection back at him. He could almost hear her voice in the quiet, soft and reproachful, mingling with his panic. Why, Ethan? Why did it come to this? Hours passed like minutes. He replayed every argument, every suspicion, every minor betrayal he had imagined or uncovered. Each moment merged into the next, forming an unending loop of guilt and self-recrimination. Ethan's mind, already fragile, began to fracture further. The once meticulous order of his thoughts unraveled, leaving chaos, fear, and overwhelming remorse in its place. As dawn began to seep through the windows, painting the mansion in pale light, Ethan finally collapsed into a chair, exhausted. The mansion remained silent, indifferent to the human tragedy within its walls. Shadows pooled in corners, the gleam of the chandeliers harsh against the soft morning glow, echoing the emptiness that had become his life. In that silence, he realized the truth. The facade was gone, the glitter and luxury meaningless, and the mansion, his home, his sanctuary, was now a mausoleum of broken trust, lost love, and moral collapse. Every room, every object, every echo of the past seemed to accuse him. He had acted in love, in fear, in desperation, and yet he had destroyed everything. And so the mansion waited, silent and patient, bearing witness to his unraveling, reflecting the emptiness, the horror, and the consequences of obsession. Ethan was alone now, trapped within walls that had once promised security, surrounded by shadows that mirrored the darkness consuming him. Detective Harper stood outside the Drake mansion, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the perimeter with meticulous care. From the street, the estate appeared pristine, a testament to wealth and control. Yet something about the quiet, too precise, set his instincts on edge. Harper had spent years noticing the smallest inconsistencies, the subtle betrayals, hidden beneath polished surfaces. Tonight, the mansion whispered of secrets, and he was determined to listen. Inside, Ethan moved through the rooms like a man haunted, unaware of the scrutiny slowly closing in. He checked the study, adjusted the furniture, wiped down surfaces, and glanced repeatedly at the surveillance cameras he had installed to monitor Vanessa. The mansion, silent and oppressive, seemed to mirror his inner torment. Each polished floor and shimmering chandelier reflecting the moral and psychological collapse within him. Harper's first clue came from an unexpected source. The house staff. The night shift housekeeper, a woman named Irene, noticed something off earlier in the evening. Small details, an unusual placement of objects, the faint scent of cleaning chemicals, the absence of Vanessa in places she should have been, triggered subtle alarms in her mind. Harper interviewed her, his questions calm yet probing, drawing out observations that at first seemed minor, but would soon form an invisible thread leading closer to the truth. Ethan, meanwhile, remained oblivious, consumed by his own spiraling paranoia. He replayed every conversation with Vanessa in his mind, searching for hidden meanings, inconsistencies, or hints of betrayal he might have missed. The mansion's silence amplified the tension, each echo of his footsteps a reminder that he was alone, and yet not unseen. Harper observed from a distance as Ethan moved through the house, noting the meticulous behavior that seemed almost ritualistic. His attention to detail, while admirable in some contexts, now appeared as nervous overcompensation. The detective scribbled notes. Patterns of obsessive behavior, possible internal conflict, observed tension in interactions with staff, surveillance, and privacy measures extreme. Every word in the notebook was a small step closer to understanding the psychological underpinnings of the man inside. Meanwhile, Ethan's paranoia escalated. He noticed small inconsistencies in the mansion, items slightly displaced, doors slightly ajar, shadows where they shouldn't be. To him, these were signs of intrusion, of Vanessa's hidden plans progressing even now. Yet Harper, unseen, was the only true observer, piecing together the puzzle silently. Harper also began noticing the patterns of communication, calls that went unanswered, messages deleted or hidden, schedules that didn't align. He cross-referenced timelines, noting the moments when Ethan had been alone in the house versus when Vanessa was expected. Each inconsistency added weight, forming a fragile lattice of suspicion that Harper knew would eventually collapse into clarity. Ethan's obsession with control became increasingly visible. He adjusted lamps, repositioned chairs, and examined doors as though their orientation could conceal secrets. Every object, every movement, was scrutinized through his lens of fear and guilt. And yet, Harper recognized the signs he had seen countless times before. A mind spiraling under the weight of its own secrets, attempting to maintain order in a space that had become morally and psychologically unmoored. The mansion itself seemed to conspire with Harper's observations. Shadows pooled in corners, chandeliers swayed faintly in the evening breeze, and polished surfaces reflected both the grandeur and the darkness contained within. It was a house alive with contradiction, beauty and menace, luxury and moral decay, silence and unspoken revelation. As night deepened, Harper made a discreet note. The first tangible evidence would likely emerge soon, a subtle clue overlooked in the chaos of wealth and obsession. Outside, the city continued its oblivious hum, unaware of the tension building within the Drake estate. Inside, Ethan remained caught in his private nightmare, unwittingly under the watchful eye of the detective who would soon unravel the threads of betrayal, obsession, and murder. The mansion, silent and patient, waited. Shadows lingered in corners, mirrors reflected distorted images, and the invisible gaze of Harper stitched together the first pieces of a puzzle Ethan had tried desperately to control. The stage was set. The collision of guilt, obsession, and justice was approaching, and neither man nor house could escape the consequences. The mansion had grown colder, or at least it seemed so to Ethan. Shadows pooled in the corners like living things, twisting with the dim glow of the chandeliers, casting eerie patterns across the polished floors. Every reflection, every glass surface, mirrored a fractured version of himself, a man torn between reality and the dark fantasies his mind now conjured. Ethan wandered aimlessly through the hallways, the note he had discovered weeks ago still clutched in one hand. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt alien, each room a trap designed to remind him of his own moral collapse. The silence pressed in, a weight he could neither push nor escape. It was in this silence that hallucinations began to seep into his perception. He thought he heard Vanessa's voice in the kitchen, soft and reproachful. Why did it have to end this way? He spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator answered him. He moved to the study, convinced he saw her standing by the window, gazing out at the city skyline, her silhouette framed in the pale moonlight. When he approached, the figure dissolved, leaving only the empty room and the echo of his racing thoughts. Objects began to betray him. Chairs appeared slightly displaced, papers seemed rearranged, and phones seemed to vibrate with messages that weren't there. Ethan convinced himself it was Vanessa's presence, her spirit haunting him, or perhaps a punishment from some higher moral law. Each phantom sound and movement accelerated the unraveling of his mind. His reflection in a tall mirror startled him. The man staring back had wild eyes, unshaven features, and a tremor in his hands that betrayed the intensity of his guilt and fear. The mansion had become a hall of mirrors, each surface reflecting not just the physical space, but the inner chaos that consumed him. He traced the cracks in the reflection as though searching for a version of himself that could still be saved, but the cracks multiplied with every heartbeat. The phones, the scattered objects, the faint traces of a life once lived, they all demanded answers he could not provide. He replayed the final confrontation with Vanessa, the argument that had led to the fatal act. Every word was magnified, every gesture reinterpreted, as though the universe itself conspired to make him relive the horror over and over. In the dining room, he found an untouched cup of coffee, its surface still rippling from the slightest breeze. For a moment, he thought he saw her reflection in the liquid, reaching toward him, silent, accusing. The vision dissolved when he leaned closer, leaving only the bitter smell of burnt beans and the echo of his own frantic breathing. Ethan sank to the floor, knees drawn to his chest. The mansion felt impossibly vast, each room a cavern of guilt, Memories mingled with hallucinations. Vanessa laughing in the sunlit garden, her hands brushing against his, the warmth of her embrace, all now impossible, unreachable, and hauntingly distant. He felt both regret and longing, love and self-loathing, an unrelenting cocktail that left him trembling and disoriented. Even the security cameras, which had once given him a sense of control, now seemed to mock him. Their red lights blinked with mechanical indifference, recording every motion, every tremor of panic. He imagined Vanessa appearing on the screens, watching, judging, her presence more vivid in his mind than any reality. As night deepened, Ethan's perception fractured further. He spoke aloud to empty rooms, confessing, pleading, threatening, as if speaking to Vanessa herself could undo the irreversible. His voice echoed back at him from the polished walls, distorted and alien. Each echo magnified the psychological torment, reinforcing the unshakable feeling that he was no longer alone, yet utterly isolated. By dawn, the mansion had become a labyrinth of fear, memory, and hallucination. Objects were out of place, shadows had shifted, and Ethan sat amidst the chaos, trapped in a mind that refused rest. The lines between past, present, and imagined horrors blurred. Every step he took seemed to echo a reminder of his actions, every reflection a judgment he could not escape. In this unrelenting silence, Ethan realized the magnitude of his unraveling. The mansion, once a home, had become a mirror of his guilt, a sprawling, silent witness to his psychological collapse. And with Detective Harper closing in, the walls themselves seemed to whisper that the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, would not remain buried forever. The morning sunlight streamed through the mansion's tall windows, casting long, unforgiving shadows across the marble floors. Ethan sat slumped in the grand foyer, the mansion silent but for the faint hum of distant traffic. The once opulent home now felt like a mausoleum of guilt and obsession, a space where every polished surface reflected his unraveling mind. He ran trembling hands through his hair, staring at the note he had found months ago, the file that had led him down a path of irreversible decisions. A knock at the door jolted him, his pulse spiked, panic rose like a tidal wave. He had become hyper-aware of every sound, every shift in the air. "Who is it?" he croaked, voice unsteady, eyes darting to the surveillance screens he still monitored obsessively. "Detective Harper," came the calm, measured voice from the other side. "We need to talk. Now." Ethan's knees buckled slightly as he rose. The mansion's shadows seemed to stretch toward him, silent witnesses to every secret, every misstep. He approached the door cautiously, the weight of dread pressing on his chest. Harper's presence was calm, yet unyielding, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed Ethan. The detective stepped inside, eyes scanning the mansion with practiced precision, noting the subtle disorder, furniture slightly shifted, papers rearranged, faint traces of panic visible in the once pristine rooms. Harper's gaze settled on Ethan, sharp and knowing. "Mr. Drake, the inconsistencies in your accounts, the alterations in the home, it doesn't add up. I think it's time we speak frankly." Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps, and for a moment his mind whirled with denial, with desperate rationalizations. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, attempting to project control, though his voice betrayed his fear. Harper's eyes softened slightly, not in sympathy, but in recognition of the human frailty before him. "Ethan, we both know that's not true. Your wife, Vanessa, she's gone. I need the truth. You need to tell me what happened." The words hung in the air like stones. Ethan's legs felt weak. He sank into a nearby chair. Memories, hallucinations, and panic collided, each thought sharper than the last. He saw her face, remembered her laughter, the warmth of her hands, and the cold reality of his actions for the first time. The enormity of his crime, the irreversible act, hit him with full force. I didn't mean... His voice cracked, choking on confession and regret. It was an accident. I lost control. Harper remained patient, listening, letting the words unfold. Ethan's confession tumbled out in jagged pieces, each fragment mingling remorse, fear, and justification. He recounted the note, the file, the confrontation, the suffocating weight of perceived betrayal. He described the act itself, the fatal grip that ended Vanessa's life, his panic afterward, the meticulous staging, the endless hours of hallucinations and guilt. The mansion, silent and monumental, seemed to absorb every word, every tremor of confession. Shadows clung to corners, chandeliers glimmered coldly, and the polished floors reflected the stark, unforgiving reality. Harper's notebook captured the details, each line a testament to both human fallibility and moral consequence. When Ethan's voice finally faltered, broken by exhaustion and grief, Harper spoke softly but firmly. "It's over now. Justice will follow. But first, you need to accept responsibility. The rest will come in time." Ethan lowered his gaze, tears streaming unchecked, the weight of the mansion and his actions pressing down upon him. He was a man stripped of pretense, wealth, and control, left with only the haunting memory of love lost and the moral cost of obsession. In the quiet, the mansion itself seemed to settle, no longer a silent accomplice. It now bore witness to confession and justice, its opulence overshadowed by the dark events it had contained. Every room, every shadow, every reflection held the echo of betrayal, obsession, and the final reckoning. Outside, sirens approached, distant yet inevitable, signaling the arrival of law enforcement and the formal unraveling of the facade Ethan had tried so desperately to maintain. The moral and psychological consequences of his actions were inescapable. The gilded mansion, once a symbol of wealth and glamour, now stood as a silent monument to human frailty and the destructive potential of obsession.